Okay, this short video is going to cover just two aspects of cutting your own mat. One will be marking the piece of mat for the mat cutter. The second part will be installing the blades into the mat cutter, and we may even include cutting the mat. So I've already cut this down to a 16 by 20 sheet, and I typically use a little device like this, 3 inches by 3 inches. I'll try to leave these around, but that saves me having to measure in 3 inches, measure in 3 inches, and do that all the way around the piece. So I can simply line this up with the corner, mark the corner, I usually flip it over, mark this corner, and flip it again. By flipping it instead of rotating it, allows me to make sure I always have the same width here. And keep flipping and lining it up with the outside edge, marking the corners, being careful not to mark too darkly and with too soft or too hard of a lead, because you're going to want to be able to erase those lines completely with no evidence of their existing. So the outside was cut, by the way, can be cut with a utility knife and a straight edge. Can also be cut with this outside device on the mat cutter. In fact, let me go ahead and show that to you. Zooming in just a little bit here. There are two types of blades. This trapezoid shaped blade, like this, is used to cut the straight cuts. In fact, we have a picture of it drawn here for straight cuts. This is the straight cut side. So this blade, there's a little knob you loosen. That blade is slid in to the holder and tightened down by hand. If it is too far out, it will drag in the bottom of the trough here, and not far enough out, and it won't cut through the paper. One of the things you should always do when you're getting ready to cut a mat is to test it a little bit. Test your blades, unless you've got new blades, and then it's not a bad idea. This mat cutter, you hold this down, but you don't have to hold it down as you're pulling it. You can actually push this little button in, and then you can just pull towards you. So by just pulling that towards me, and I have the blade just a little bit far out, it was wanting to cut, push that to release it, so that blade is up. But I have a really clean cut now on that. I don't usually use this straight side to cut my outside of my mat. I will typically do that with a utility knife or an X-Acto knife and a metal ruler over on the cutting table. So, more importantly for our purposes right now is the bevel cut. That blade is rectangular, and by the way, you never want to use a utility knife blade on this other side. Only get blades that we have in the main office. We sell them at cost, and you probably want to start with a fresh blade. If you're using a blade that's in here, you'll need to test it. So this blade, this will have to be loose, this knob. The blade is going to slide in, leaving just enough to go through the mat. And so now we're ready to hold that down and make the cut. I've already marked the corners. Now this is not necessarily the way all professional mat cutters work, or people who are cutting mats. I like to mark on the top of my mat instead of the bottom with the face down. Some professionals cut with the face down, and they use a new blade every time they cut. Because I'm not necessarily using a brand new blade every time I make a cut, I want that bottom side of the cut to be really clean. And if this blade isn't real sharp, the bottom side of the cut is going to be, or even the top side could be a little uneven. So I'm cutting with the face up in this case, and here's very important. That blade has to go into the paper about 1/8 of an inch or a little more on the other side of my little marker lines I drew. I'm going to push the blade in and then just simply pull it towards me, being careful that I just barely go past this line. Then I rotate it, line it up with my marks. I am not using the square device down here. I'm lining up with my pencil lines. Again, push it in a little bit on the other side of the cut. Because it's a bevel, we want that cut to go all the way through to the other side. Cutting past here slightly. And now rotate it one more time. Very carefully, I'm lifting the weight off of that, lining it up with both lines. Now it is going to make the cut, the window size is going to be slightly smaller than where my marks are because there's a bevel there. I'm losing about 1/8 of an inch on all sides. So a little bit beyond, poke it through and drag it towards me a little bit past that line, and I have one more cut. Now if I have not been cutting beyond all of my pencil lines, it won't, the one I'm cutting out won't fall out freely. If I've been doing it correctly, this falls out freely. Now I have this really nice clean bevel all the way around the perimeter. If I've used a bad blade, oh well, back up a little bit. By the way, I'm using the back side of a green mat because I wanted a white mat for the demonstration. But this, if I did not overcut there and this doesn't fall out, then you're going to need to take a razor blade. You don't want to tear that mat out, and you'll have to slide it along the bevel and cut that corner free where you didn't overcut. Hopefully that won't happen. And one more thing, if I have any ragged edges on the bottom of this from a blade that wasn't real sharp, you can take a piece of sandpaper and lay it completely flat on the back side and just lightly sand that rough edge off. You'll probably get a clean cut here on the top side. So the only thing left to do now is erase my pencil lines, making sure I erase toward the window so I don't accidentally tear my mat where it's overcut. So I just need to erase those lines. Now I have a mat, it's a 16 by 20 mat with an 11 by 14 opening. So actually that's going to be a 10 by 14 opening. So that is the basics of cutting a mat.